Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. I think I've mentioned a few times that I had the pleasure to join Jim Hyde's Small Scale Developer Forum in Kansas City this last fall. And it feels like I'm kind of working through a list of people that I met associated with that really interested me and I wanted to talk with. The list is pretty extensive and I'm sure there's going to be more, but I'm delighted to have another guest on today who is intimately involved in the forum, Doug Moss. Doug, how you doing, man?
Good. Thank you, Kevin. Good to see you.
Thanks for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you and get to interview you. So we get to turn the tables. You asked me a lot of questions in preparation for the forum, and now I get
Excellent.
to do the same for you. Uh, First of all, Doug, why don't we just start with some of the basics? Who are you and where are you?
Okay, sure. Well, I grew up in Texas in a small town outside of Austin called Taylor, and
Is
that's an
is
important
Taylor still small today, or
it
has it been enveloped by everything else around Austin?
it's beginning to get enveloped. It's been far enough away from Austin that it didn't have a very fast growth like communities you may have heard of like Round Rock and Georgetown and Cedar Park. But it's now beginning to get that way, partly because in 2021, um, 2022, Samsung announced that they were going to build a new $37 billion
Ooh,
fabrication plant in the little bitty town. And so that's the first, what I'll call substantial action that's
that
happened in that little town
that's
in
a big
since,
footprint for a little
yeah,
town.
really since the beginning of the town when the railroad came through in 1876. This is the next big thing.
Oh
So,
yeah,
so that has really dramatically impacted what a lot of people are thinking about. So the plant's still under construction, but it's on its way.
wow, wow.
So I grew up in Texas, went to school in Texas at Texas Tech, and then I moved to New York City, and I was a practicing architect for 31 years.
Hmm.
And it was really small scale real estate development that got me back to Texas, which is where I live now. So I live in downtown Austin, which is about a 35-minute drive to downtown Taylor. But in December of 2017, I was home visiting family for the holidays and found an old derelict building that was for sale. And it was a very reasonable price in a downtown that was pretty deserted, other than
Mhm.
maybe one other building that had undergone major renovation work. So I kind of jumped in because I've always had an interest in becoming a small scale real estate developer, just never knew when or how it would happen. And then all of a sudden, I found myself with two historic buildings and some extra land and decided it was time to figure all this out. So
Yeah.
that's what started it all. And after completing that project, I've now gone on and purchased other projects, which we can talk about. But that got me so head over heels with small scale real estate development that I moved back from New York City to Central Texas to really start to implement this work and carry it on.
Well, it's interesting. It's funny the things that draw people back, and 30 years or so is no small amount of time to spend in New York. That's a big chunk of somebody's life. What was the kind of architecture work you were doing there?
The work I was doing there and the work that I'm still doing, because we opened an office in Austin to allow me to get back to Central Texas. So the
Hmm.
work that I've always done has either been performing arts or public libraries or city halls.
Hmm.
And that's been my career focus for the last 30 plus years.
And is it like your own firm, or are you a partner in a firm, or how's that work?
It was my own firm in New York. I had two other partners. And then in 2019, we merged with what I'll call a medium-sized firm, maybe 150 people or so, called Steinberg Hart. And now I'm a partner of Steinberg Hart, and so Steinberg Hart is the one that brought me back to Central Texas to open an office in Austin.
So just kind of, I think it's interesting to think about all this because I know you and I both probably talk to a lot of other fellow architects who have ideas for doing different things, for maybe getting into development or diversifying their own client base or anything like that. So when you got the bug in December of 2017 and thought about doing this thing, were you doing any work in Texas at that time?
Yeah, the entire time I've been in New York, all 31 years, I've been flying back and forth to New York doing performing arts centers,
Okay.
libraries, city halls. So I actually have reduced my amount of travel now that I'm back
Yeah.
in Texas because so much of our work is in the state of Texas, and it was
Okay.
also across the entire country. But so we've got a very good both reputation and just prior projects in the
Mhm.
state.
So then you picked up this bug for doing development stuff, but you kept, I assume you kept your gig for some period of time doing the architecture thing and are still, mostly full time doing that or still full time doing architecture.
I'm full time as a partner in the architectural firm, and I run
Right.
the Austin office. And then my development work I kind of do in my spare time on weekends and evenings.
Hmm. So you have spare time on the weekends and evenings then.
Well, not anymore.
That's always a challenge, especially for
Yes, it
people
is.
who are gainfully employed. What would you? Let's start right there. What would you tell other architects? I think it's interesting to start there and think about what would you talk to other architects about who have said, God, it might be cool to own a building or do some of my own development work. What are some things that you have found that have been beneficial or that you learned by doing this yourself?
The first thing I would say is to do it as quickly as you can. Because if there's any regret I've ever had, it's the fact that I did not get involved
Mm,
in real estate development earlier in my career. Because architects are so uniquely qualified to do small scale real estate development, particularly in my case, where I'm doing it in a small community. I'm doing it all in a downtown area within about a 5 block radius of each other. And it can have a huge impact on the community. It could have a huge impact on your own personal finances. Maybe not short term,
mhm,
but long term it can. And as I said, architects are uniquely qualified to deal with the design aspect, the approval process aspect, understanding the financial aspect, understanding the marketing aspect. So architects are really uniquely qualified to, at least on the small scale in particular, be able to make some very successful and very creative projects.
mhm. So one thing that we probably both know is, most of our architects are really good at like the design side, the creative side, but get kind of really mystified on the financial part. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up. What got you over the hump in doing that? And have you found that to be easy to learn? Or for lack of a better word.
Um, Probably part of the reason it's been easier for me is I've been a partner in either my own firm or a larger firm for probably 25 of the
Mm,
31 years. So I have had the responsibilities of dealing with HR issues and business development issues and financial issues for a long time. And so and I also grew up in my father in this little town I'm doing my development work in, um, owns a hardware store.
mm,
Now my brother owns it. And so we were raised in the hardware store, understanding how to work with customers, understanding how to count change back to people. All of that was very mom and pop oriented. And so I think all of that has at least helped me have a
mhm,
much stronger basis of being able to do that. But you're right, a lot of architects that's not their forte. And because we're dealing with whether it's you're building a large residential home or you're building a commercial project, we're dealing with large amounts of money in our
mhm,
day-to-day practice. And we all, I think, probably need to be really good at understanding how to deal with finances, understanding what impacts those finances and what's impacting our clients. if we're an architect. So I think it's all very doable. So if you haven't done it before, doing your own small scale development, you will quickly start
Mhm.
to understand finances differently when you're writing all the checks out of your own checking account.
Has anything surprised you on the financial side? Just thinking about kind of working through like your first project.
Yes, the first project was really challenging because I couldn't find any investors.
Hmm.
So I went to a number of people in the community. I went to local bankers, people that I thought would be very supportive, and they could not see the vision that I could see in
Hmm.
developing these old derelict buildings into something that would be impactful. And our vision was to turn it into residential spaces, loft spaces, and some retail spaces. And so, from the local potential investors and bankers, it was problematic because it was near a train, which would be noisy. There wasn't parking. There
Hmm.
wasn't a yard. There wasn't an elevator. You were on the main street. So that they had lots of reasons that this would not, from their point of view or their perspective, not be a successful project. And therefore, they considered it too big of a risk.
Hmm.
Um, Finally, I got two investors. One was a dear friend from my college days, and one was my brother, who
Hmm.
also happens to be an architect. And so the three of us went in and made the first building quite a success, and it's been fully leased since the day we opened it. It's been quite wonderful, and it's been there've only been four other people that lived in downtown Taylor
Hmm.
before the six people that now we've added to downtown living in Taylor. So now we have 10 people that live in
Nice.
downtown Taylor.
Nice. So tell me, so this, let's talk about what the scope of that project was. How big, like, how many square feet, how many apartments and retail spaces, et cetera?
So it's two historic buildings, both built in the one in the 1890s and one in the early 1900s, but they had been joined together. They have a party wall
Mhm.
that they share. And the whole building is 12,000 square feet, two floors of space. And we've turned it into nine live work lofts. And the reason we chose live work lofts is at the beginning, when most of the downtown was completely dead, we did not know who would rent these spaces, whether it would be
Mhm.
a retail space or an office space or someone who wanted to use it for their home. Ultimately, what kind of happened fairly quickly when we finished the project is that six of the nine, which really were the ones that are most focused on residential living, those
Mhm.
became residential lofts. Some people use them strictly as living. Some people have painting studios in them and art studios in them. And then three of the ones that have a very prominent storefront presence, those have been retail spaces. We currently have a small grocer,
Hmm.
we've got a bookstore, and then a women's ready-to-wear slash wine bar
Hmm.
slash chicken feed store. Uh, so
Now that sounds like something you'd see in a small town. So
exactly.
yeah.
So she sells the chicken feed to the same people that come and have a glass of wine on a Thursday night. So
Perfect.
yes.
Perfect. One thing I'm curious about. So I know just enough to be dangerous about like live work type construction. I know from a building code standpoint and a construction standpoint that can get really complicated really quickly in terms of separating the uses out and or the combination of residential and commercial uses. How did you navigate that, or what did you have to deal with doing that in a renovation?
Well, and as a part of that answer, I also need to let you know we decided to use historic tax credits for this project.
Oh, okay.
So
All
we
right.
use both historic tax credits that are provided by the state of Texas and through the National Park Service. And so that review process was yet another layer of added to the design review.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the city of Taylor at that time was pretty lax with some of their code review,
Mm-hmm.
primarily because there hadn't been a project like this before. And so we were not mandated to the strictest level that I think if we were doing a project today in downtown Taylor that we would be held to.
Mm-hmm.
So that provided some flexibility. But the building is fully sprinkled with a full alarm system, and we do
Mm-hmm.
have the proper separations between all the units, both horizontally and vertically.
Interesting. And then how much did the tax credit portion of it play into the success of the project for you guys? Was that important in the end, or?
It was the only way we could make our pro forma work, and partly because the rents in this area are very low, and even to this day they're still low. We think long term there'll be an opportunity for increases in those rents, but for the moment they're low, and so those tax credits allowed us to pay down part of our construction loan, which has allowed us to have a smaller note that we're carrying on the building. But we only used half of the of the money from the tax credits to pay down the note. The other half we actually used to purchase cash the next project that we purchased, which was a half city block of an old Presbyterian church about 3 blocks away.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that became the next project that we started doing almost as soon as we completed this first project.
So after the completion of that first one, how did the attitude change within the town in terms of people's not just kind of interest in what you're doing, but also like the bankers and the other folks and thinking about the financial viability?
Uh, Good question, and one that I knew would be important because part of the purpose of doing this is not just to be a developer and make money. A lot of this was
Hmm.
about me giving back to the community that I grew up in and making a real sense of place in downtown Taylor and doing things that other people could look at and say, "Oh, that's possible here. Maybe we should take some of these other buildings because we have an amazing inventory of old historic buildings." And so I gave tours of the building during construction to the community. We'd had open community houses. We gave tours to people, both public as well as private ones, and one-on-one tours to whether it's bankers or whether it's investors,
Hmm.
to folks. And once they began to see that within the first 4 months, and we opened in January of 2020, so
Mm.
just 2 months before COVID,
Mm.
and even with that, we were completely, I think we had all but one unit rented by May of 2020 of COVID year.
Mm.
So it became quite a success. And some of the primary retail store was a store that had been in Taylor for a couple of decades, and they decided to move from kind of a windowless off the primary road location to this very prominent location. So I think people liked the fact that a local business was
Mm.
relocating and going into a larger place. Some very prominent people in the community even moved to the lofts so that they could
Oh,
live downtown and live in an urban space. So it did over a fairly quick period of time become um, a prominent building that people saw as a success in restoring and renovating and transforming old historic buildings.
do you think seeing that it gave people in the town a different impression of their own place, like the place that they live and what it is or what it could be?
That's my hope. Um, Unfortunately, we haven't seen the magnitude of restoration projects or adaptive reuse projects in downtown that we would like to see. I think that's beginning to slowly change, particularly with the increase in interest from the Samsung plant. But in terms of actual construction work that's been done or design work that's been done, it's been slow. But I certainly people look at that first building as a prominent example of how, one alternative of how buildings could be transformed.
Yeah. So then you move on. Was the church property, was that like immediately or your next thing, or were you looking at a variety of other things along the way?
No, it just kind of came up. The congregation had dwindled to about five older folks on a weekly basis, and after a number of years, the Presbyterian church decided it was time to close that location. And I think the greatest concern in the community was to make sure someone wouldn't buy it and then just tear it down.
Hmm.
It consisted of two buildings. One was a 1912 historic sanctuary that had a partial basement below it that was used as their fellowship hall in 1912.
Wow.
And then the second building, immediately adjacent to it, The first building was wood was all concrete construction, brick, beautiful columns, Corinthian columns on the front. The second building was a 1950s wood frame building, single floor. It was being used as the fellowship hall
Hmm.
and the Sunday school classes and the minister's office. And so it was a U-shaped building with an outdoor corridor. You'd walk on the corridor on the outside to get to all the rooms and get to the
Hmm.
fellowship hall. And it's about a 5,100 square foot building and very well built for a building built in 1950. Very, very sturdy and had great bones. So both buildings have really good bones to them, and that was the reason that we were able to buy them because they sat on the market for over a year with no one showing any interest. And I kept telling the real estate agent if he would, I'd be happy to give him a an offer, but it would need to be fairly low in order for me to be able to make the buildings work. And ultimately, that's what worked after they weren't able to sell it in any other means.
So buying an old church is, that's a chore. There's not often like an immediate reuse idea. I mean, a lot of cities are filled with old churches now that are empty or have never found a new use. There have been some great creative, adaptive reuses in some cities, but it's not an easy thing to do. So, like, what made you want to tackle a project like that?
For one, it was an ideal location. It was just on the edge of downtown and was just 2 blocks away from a development that was created, I guess, in the late maybe in the late 2018s, 2019s or so. They took an old high school that was built in the 1920s and turned it into some retail and office and food and beverage operations. And so my feeling was, and it became quite popular in this small community. And my feeling was that this church was halfway between that old high school and downtown. So the distance between the old high school and downtown is 6 city blocks, and I'm right in the middle,
Hmm.
3 blocks from both of them. So that was one major reason, and I thought it would be a way for us to start linking these portions of downtown for people to walk to these locations, for people to ride bikes to these locations, and to understand we have a really charming small place that you can
Hmm.
create an extraordinary environment. The old high school was actually where I went to junior high school, so I knew the building well. I would ride downtown on my bicycle in the 70s to get lunch every day. So
Hmm.
I know how small the community was, and I thought this church would be the perfect intermediary to have an infill project and to restore these old buildings. So
So,
we decided to think
go
about
ahead.
it as a mixed use project.
Okay. So then talk more about. So how do you reuse that old sanctuary space and what has been your approach on that property?
So at the same time that we purchased that, the city also asked me to be on their comprehensive master plan committee.
Hmm.
They were in the process of completely rethinking their zoning for the community, and I began to think of this old church building as kind of the ideal scenario of illustrating to the community how this new comprehensive plan could be implemented. And so we thought of it as creating a multi-use facility. So the old church would become some type of food and beverage operation, ideally a unique restaurant on both the first and the second floor.
Hmm.
We would add a small coffee shop that would be a new building, kind of a contemporary building on the corner that would help be a prominent placemaker. We finished that just a few months ago, and we've leased that to a small coffee shop that has just been doing
Hmm.
great things and a great menu. And then the old fellowship hall and Sunday school classes, we turned that into a boutique hotel, which we are running ourselves. We have 11 rooms, and it was opened in May of 2024. So we haven't quite gotten to our 1 year mark, but it's going well. And then on the church parking lot, because the new comprehensive plan wouldn't require any parking, we took the parking lot and we have designed courtyard apartment that's really focused on workforce housing and kind of missing middle housing that will have a total of 17 apartments of various sizes and then
Wow.
one corner retail space. So the only two things we've finished so far has been the boutique hotel and the coffee shop, but we are actively looking for tenants for the unique food and beverage operation. And then when the equity market changes a bit, we will start looking for investors for the courtyard apartment.
So, I mean, I got a lot of questions about that, but I guess just thinking, first and foremost, how did you approach like then the sort of the financing and phasing of a project like that? Are Is it just like you went ahead, you bought this whole thing, but you're just go to the bank with your first phase is the coffee shop and the hotel, basically?
Yeah, so the purchase we were able to do entirely by cash using those historic tax credits I told you about. So I was
Okay,
able to talk my two partners from the first project into rolling their money all into the purchase of the church site, and this is about a half city block. Um, we then started looking for investors, and this time around, miraculously, it was much easier.
yeah,
People were very interested in talking to me because they had seen, even though it was still only one project, and even though my learning curve as a small scale young developer was still very steep, um, it was different because we had had one success story. And so, both with community investors and some folks from a nearby community that has a beautiful historic downtown, and they understand and appreciate how to transform historic buildings, we added another um, seven investors to the
hmm,
three from the first one. So we have a total of 10 investors and put up about a third of the money, and then the other two-thirds we were able to get from a bank and as a loan.
okay. And then, but the other like residential pieces you might do, or even the church renovation, is that then like a separate package you do later?
We will either go back to the original investors and see if they'd like to add additional investment and or expand the investor pool and find additional investors.
Okay. Well, for what it's worth, I've seen some pretty amazing church renovations for entertainment like that. And I was just thinking about that. We were just this last fall, we were in Ireland, and in Dublin, we went to an old church that had been turned into a bar restaurant, and they had a little stage where they did like music and dance and everything as well. It was remarkable. It was an absolute gorgeous setup and space. Um,
Ha-
seen
Have you have you been to the one in Bentonville, Arkansas? A
mm,
really beautiful restaurant that's been transformed in downtown
no,
Bentonville.
no, I haven't. I'll have to check that out.
That's a recent one that really is a success story and quite
Interesting.
beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in Bentonville. I'll have to check that out. Yeah. So, and I've seen another one that was turned into a brewery.
Hmm.
One that was into a food hall. So I think there's you're on the right track. It's just probably like anything. It's finding that unique tenant who's willing to take the risk and do that. Uh,
Take the risk, but also appreciate the building.
yeah,
The
yeah,
building has some gorgeous stained glass windows that we want to maintain as a part of the process. And so it's finding a tenant that is both experienced and isn't just doing this for the first time, but also is unique and creative, both with their menu as well as understanding this unique building. So
yeah,
we're searching for it, and I think because of our proximity to Austin, we will find someone. Quite frankly, we just haven't been focused on that until we got the hotel and the coffee shop opened.
yeah. Is the how far away did you say Taylor is from Austin?
It's about a 35-minute drive,
Okay, so it's
so
like
it's
close
it's
enough
close.
that
Hmm.
that's a day trip, easy sort of drive. That
Absolutely.
yeah. Has there been any inklings of like trying to capture that traffic from the much larger city of weekend getaways, that sort of thing? That's not uncommon for small towns near big cities.
That's the intent. And there are some real success stories like Georgetown and Salado and Fredericksburg that are within a 45-minute to an hour and a half drive. and our hope is to help make Taylor one of those destinations as well. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. So along the way, so this is only the second, the project for you. Has it spurred interest in the third and the fourth? And are you starting to just get enough of the itch that you looking at everything in town?
I'm definitely not looking at everything because since the Samsung announcement, all the prices have gone up, and so I probably couldn't afford anything anymore. But we have our hands full. We also just about 8 months ago purchased an old mansion that's on Main Street that
Hmm.
is just across the alley from the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in very poor condition right now. And our plan, though, is if the hotel does well to expand and have additional hotel rooms in that building.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't think that it's that strong of a market, we might turn it into small apartments, studio apartments, things like that.
Yeah.
But it's right on Main Street, has a great prominence, and is kind of part of the gateway to downtown. So it's another project that we're getting ourselves into.
Yeah. That's great. Let's talk about the small scale forum for a minute.
Sure.
How did you end up getting hooked up with Jim and that group?
Probably the day after I put an offer in on my very first project, I started Googling, how in the world do you become a small scale developer? And one way or the other, I found Jim's group, which originally was a part of ULI, and now Jim is doing on his own as the Small Scale Developer Forum. And it has been just an amazing part of my growth as a small scale real estate developer because there are so many great people there, some that are working on their first project and have never done one before, some that are very experienced and are working on their 10th or 12th, some that are doing this full time, some that are just doing this nights and weekends. So it's a great cross section of people. But what's important is they're not just focused on doing real estate development. They're doing real estate development that really has a heart and soul to it. Real estate development that's very meaningful in the communities that they're working in. In many cases, they are infill projects. They're also really focused on things that this country is trying to grapple with, like how do we deal with workforce housing? How do we deal with dealing with small retailers? Because small retailers have a horrible time paying rent. So
Hmm.
how are we helping them be successful, but also have these amazing shops that people can visit and experience? So it's a really I think Jim uses the phrase, found your tribe,
Hmm.
and I think this is an amazing tribe that has been a great a new part of my life since 2017. So the first one I went to was in Charleston, South Carolina, and I've been to just about all, but I probably have missed a couple of them in there somewhere. But I've been he has them twice a year in
Hmm.
different parts of the U.S. And so each time is a 2 or 2.5 days of activity that's just filled with visiting interesting projects as well as talking to those developers and understanding, the things that they're doing that they wish they'd do differently next time, or the things that they're doing that were really a success and would recommend others do. So it's been a great learning experience.
Yeah. And you feel like as much as anything, it kind of, I mean, the phrase probably gets used too much, but enables you to have like a support group of sorts.
Being a small scale developer is a very lonely task because there's no one in your community that necessarily can relate to some of the challenges that you're going through. Um, you don't necessarily want to have every discussion with your investors because some of them are more hands off and don't want to
Mhm.
know necessarily the nitty gritty. And so having a group like the Small Scale Developer Forum, you can call them up, you can send them an email and just get their thoughts, and they're very willing to share their thoughts and experiences. And so it's a great support group. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that one of the big differences is like people who tend to be focused in just like one location. And I've certainly seen that. I just here on the podcast have had, people from Mineral Wells, Texas, Bend, Oregon, here in Kansas City. I think about Monty Anderson in South Dallas and, communities kind of all over. But the commonality is these are not people who are looking, They're not trying to do 200 unit apartment complexes in 20 cities around the country. They're trying to improve where they live, the place that they care about, or a place that they really care about, and have a positive impact while making money along the way.
Yeah, that's a very important part of what my vision is for what we've been doing. I mean, the various projects that I have, the greatest distance from one to the other is probably an 8-minute walk. So it's very important that, and I have no interest in ever doing anything in any other community. I just have an interest in continuing to focus on this downtown that I grew up in.
Yeah. Do you see yourself like it, can you see yourself moving back?
I don't know. Moving from New York City, of a city of 8.25 million people, to Austin, Texas, that was a big change already.
Yeah.
So that I have to live with that for a few years first.
Can we talk about Austin for a minute?
Sure.
uh, I'm thinking about, it's funny. I was just talking to my wife the other night. There was something about Austin on TV, and we were talking about just the incredible growth and change that Austin has had in the last 20 or 30 years. A city that, used to be much, much smaller than Kansas City, which is my frame of reference,
Hmm.
and now is pretty much, I think, equal or slightly larger than Kansas City in terms of population, in terms of the metro area. You having grown up nearby in Taylor, you've you've certainly seen this transformation from when you were a little kid to what was probably a fairly regional place to now it's like a national icon. What's that experience been like? Seeing that change.
It has been a drastic transformation from what I knew it as a child, or and as a teenager, and even coming back home while I was going to school. So the transformation is dramatic, and it's a very beautiful city. It has beautiful parks and trails, lakes. I mean, it's a place that really allows and encourages you to be outdoors a lot,
Hmm.
but it also has a really amazing downtown. I live downtown. My office is downtown. So I have another very small, probably 15-minute radius of which I can walk or bike to all the restaurants and grocery stores and anything that I would use on a regular basis. So I have a somewhat um, varied perspective from most people
Hmm.
that live in Austin, because I live, downtown near Austin Town Lake, or now called Lady Bird Lake, and not I'm very seldom caught in the traffic jams that people
Hmm.
deal with when they
Hmm.
live, in other parts of Austin. But it's a very rich community in the sense that it's got amazing food, amazing arts and
Yeah.
culture, um, and just a fun place to be around. Lots and lots of energy and activity, and it's a destination for all types of conferences and wedding events. And I mean, everyone wants to come to Austin for at least a weekend.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it's becoming, like the center of the world for a whole lot of different things. Even such things as, like, comedy scene, and it's always been entertainment driven, always been an incredible music city. But now the comedy scene and everything else is pretty remarkable. And it's been fascinating, like from afar, to see just how quickly that city has grown and changed. And I can imagine, like, even coming from New York, it's there's obviously a very big difference between a city like New York and just about anywhere in the country. But from a hustle and bustle standpoint, Austin has a lot more of it now than it ever used to.
Yes, and one of the things that has dramatically changed in Austin is housing.
Yeah.
And so, though Austin has always had beautiful neighborhoods made up of small single-family homes, in the last 15 years, the magnitude of large-scale multifamily developments have really inundated, particularly the primary corridors in Austin.
Hmm.
Some of those pretty nice architecture, probably more of those not very nice
Hmm.
architecture. And in fact, the firm that I work with, Steinberg Hart, we're doing projects now in Austin that are focused on multifamily as well, and really trying to create livable, walkable, beautiful designed communities as a part of that. but the magnitude of expansion and the speed of that expansion with multifamily has really been something that very few cities have seen this much growth. And now, well, I guess during COVID, a lot of people moved to Austin,
Hmm.
and now because of the continued rent increases, people are beginning to kind of think about where they want to be long term, and so there's been a occupancy rate higher or vacancy rate higher than desired by
Yeah.
developers, and also rents are beginning to come back down. So it went from a real hotbed of activity in the 2021, and is beginning to calm down a little bit, which I think we needed a correction of some
Yeah.
sort. But it's still a very rapidly growing community, particularly the suburbs around Austin, and will continue to be so.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just reading recently about it's one of the markets in the country where rents are actually falling at a fairly
Mhm.
significant rate, and which we haven't seen much of in a while.
That's
Um,
correct.
yeah.
But it'll level out because though a lot of buildings, a lot of residential buildings are just finishing construction now, there's not a lot more in the pipeline right now. So it'll take
Yeah.
a little while to recover, to recoup that that magnitude of vacancy, and then we'll be back up and running again.
How do you think about since you kind of live in these very different but interesting worlds, living right in the middle of a big bustling city like Austin, and then you do this small scale work in a place in a small town like Taylor. How do you how do you think about somebody who lives in a place like Austin that wants to do small scale stuff, like, and how they might enter that world?
Well, this is the topic I thought a lot about when I lived in New York, because I've wanted to do small scale development for many years. Um, I think it's obvious, but I could never have done it in New York City, because even a small piece of land is just unreasonably priced. And so I was always looking in communities outside of New York, an hour away, 2 hours away, 3 hours away.
Mhm.
Didn't ever find that for whatever reason. But now that I'm living in downtown Austin and working in Taylor, that's really been ideal for me because I have my roots in Taylor. I have a lot of connections with people that I grew up with that are still uh, um, significant community players in the community that are still there. So it's been great to reacquaint myself with those folks. But more importantly, because it is a much smaller scale and it's a much smaller market, it's allowed me to make mistakes if need be, and not be ruined financially by making mistakes. You obviously need to be very careful about it because these are the biggest projects I've ever done, even though they're small in
Mhm.
comparison to what a lot of people are doing around the country. They are impactful to the community, which has been important. But I would encourage people to, if you're living in a large city, don't just think about doing a development in that city because there are lots of challenges doing that, and you really need the capital to be able to push through some of your hurdles. And so, if you're working in a small community, like my first project, they were delighted to have some kind of construction activity in downtown. They were,
Mhm.
with open arms, welcoming me to the community, back to the community, and trying to help me through problems. And we have, and to this day, still have a great collaboration with the small community, the city staff, etc., to help through the process of these buildings because they're not typical projects. They're not building a new Taco Bell or McDonald's. It's every corner is some kind of new challenge, and you need some assistance and collaboration to make that work. And
Mhm.
small towns are a great way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. I mean, there's awful also obviously a lot written about small residential stuff in bigger cities, whether that be like ADUs or, cottage courts, smaller infill type things. Have you met or known anybody like in the city of Austin who's doing those sorts of things as well and talk to them?
Yes, I'm actually a part of a group mostly of architects. There are some builders and real estate brokers, but mostly architects that get together on a monthly basis, and they're doing development, small scale development work as well as their day job as an architect. And that's been a great group, and some of those have been really successful developers at doing, small and medium-sized projects. So I'm not suggesting you can't do that because this
Yeah.
group clearly the
Yeah.
whole group is doing it. On the other hand, um, you have less room for error, either
Right.
financial or schedule, when you're working in a larger community. So it really just depends on what your abilities and appetite are, both for risk and financing, and I would say more importantly than anything, knowing the community well is
Yeah.
important. So if you live in a large city but you know it really, really well, then that may be the right place. I will say, knowing the community of Taylor as well as I did, and knowing so many people in the community, that had a really big impact. And you're not walking into a room with a capital D developer over your head and with a bad reputation. You're walking into a room as this person that grew up here and their family has had businesses here for decades, since the 60s, and is actually coming back and doing something in a real positive contribution. And so uh, I I may have a bad reputation, but I don't think I have a bad reputation as a bad developer in this community. So that's another thing that's very nice about knowing the community so well, is that people know you as a person as opposed to thinking of you as just a quote unquote developer.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and it's I think that's a huge advantage that we talk about the challenges of small scale development, but there are advantages too, and that's the sort of interpersonal relationships and the intimate knowledge you have of one particular place is a great way to make an advantage of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, well, Doug, any final parting advice that you might give for folks who are intrigued about this kind of effort and maybe thinking about looking at projects in their own town or somewhere nearby?
Uh, the first one is, as I said towards the beginning, start early, start as fast as you can. That's a very important thing,
Just take the leap.
because just take the leap. I thought about it and thought about it for so many years. It's amazing that once you do it, it's just, you can make it happen. And then the second thing is not doing something too big, doing something that you feel comfortable with. It could be a very small project, but you'll learn an enormous amount from that first project, whatever size it is. And I think the most important thing is just getting started, and to have a lot of fun with it, and to not think about a small scale development just on the financial side of things, but to think about the impact it's going to have on that community, the impact that it's going to have on the residents, on the character of the community or on the neighborhood that you're working in, and to really do something positive, not just do something for a financial gain, but to make sure you're thinking about the whole picture of the project and what kind of positive impact it could have. Because there are decisions, and you know this, Kevin, being a developer yourself, there are decisions that you make along the way that will have a dramatic impact on the neighbors, on the community, on the city, on how people view small scale real estate development. And so those are really important decisions to make sure that you're thinking those through, and ultimately making a decision that is contributing to the greater whole.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great, Doug. I appreciate that. That's a nice way to sum it up. And if somebody is trying to find you and what you're doing, what do you suggest is the best way to reach out to you?
They could go to my website, which my small scale developer website, which is publicsketch.net. And on that website is the best way to reach me, both via email and my phone. You can also see the projects that we currently have or that we're in the process of developing. So that's probably the easiest way to reach out. And I would encourage people to, because like I said to you about the small scale developer forum, it's people that are working on these small scale projects, helping each other, no matter where they may be within the
Yeah,
within the U.S., that it can have a dramatic impact on some other community. So I'm more than happy to help give any kind of thoughts or commentary that a person might have. So delighted to do that. And
yeah,
and Kevin, also thanks for having me on this podcast as well. I really enjoy listening to the podcast. You've had some amazing guests, And it helps people, as I said earlier, when you're kind of on your own in your own bubble, it helps think about what other people are doing and the exciting things that other people are endeavoring to accomplish.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and it's fun for me to kind of get connected with people and share stories. And I think, much like you said, it's it, in this world, everybody is kind of their own entrepreneur, and it's hard to it's not easy to connect with similar people doing similar kinds of work. It's not like you run a coffee shop in a city where there's 20 other coffee shops and you can all kind of check in on each other. So I love finding ways for people to kind of learn and connect with each other. So Doug, thanks
Agreed.
very much. Um, I look forward to visiting Taylor one of these days and seeing your buildings. I'll
Let
stay.
me know.
We'll stay
I'll
at
let
your
you.
B and B there.
Yep, I'll get you the best room in the house.
All right. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Kevin.
Take
Okay,
care.
bye-bye.
Bye.